Hello and welcome. We're going to get started. My name is Maureen Ryan. I'm the Deputy Director, the Center for 21st Century Studies at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, please take a seat, grab your popcorn. You're not on video, so just some logistical things before I make room for everybody else to get started talking. You are not going to be seen, your video camera's not on. You can communicate if you want to ask a question using the chat function. So if you leave a comment, the live scrolling comments on the side, they'll be visible and we'll get to them at the end. So the structure of things is going to be that Dr. Monique Liston is going to give her talk first. She's going to hand it over to Dasha Kelly-Hamilton second. They're each going to talk 15 minutes or so, and then they're going to have a conversation together, followed by a Q&A that is drawn from the questions that you leave in the comments. So if you have questions, leave them there. We'll get to them at the end. We hope you enjoy it. This is a new format for us. We're very disappointed in a lot of ways that we couldn't convene the Alt Milwaukee conference in person. This is going to be an interesting and I think really exciting substitute and way to do that instead of meeting in person. So with that, I will turn it over to our director, Richard Gerson, who's going to introduce our speakers today.
Good afternoon. It's a gorgeous day in really just delighted and excited to be hosting this conversation between Monique Liston and Dasha Kelly-Hamilton. I've known Monique for 5 years easily, maybe more. And she helped us out on a project at the center some years back. And we've been in touch ever since. I'm really excited to hear her take on alt MKE, and Dasha Kelly-Hamilton is, of course, the Poet Laureate of Milwaukee, and I'm equally enthused to hear her conversation and comments as well. I'm sure you will be too. This is, as Maureen alluded to, 2 weeks ago, we would have been hosting our annual spring conference on alt MKE, and where we had both local plenary speakers and participants, people like Dasha and Monique, but also people from actually all over the country and across the ocean. COVID made that obviously impossible, and for a long time in our initial reaction to the first shutdown, we thought we just wouldn't be able to do anything at all for the conference. But as we all got accustomed to this new world, this strange new world we're living in, we decided we wanted to do something to honor the conference. And so it's really great to have the participation of our two local Milwaukee plenary speakers in this different format, but one I think that'll really be great for everyone. So really, with little further ado, I'm going to just hand the baton over to Monique Liston, and she'll begin. It's all yours, Mo.
Thank you. It's definitely an honor and a pleasure to be able to be a part of the Alt Milwaukee conference. I think to begin, it's important for us to understand and contextualize what scholar and historian John Henrik Clarke reminds us, that we have to understand and know our political time of day. And so I am entering in this space well aware of what is happening in the world around us. We are experiencing a global pandemic. We are experiencing both community and social crisis. We are also showing up in a world that has not done justice to Black people, to Black folks. And that is continuous and a part of this space right now. So I show up in the conversation about Alt Milwaukee of understanding that my existence, every bit of what it means for me to exist and show up and love and be joyous, is alt. It is the subversive. It is the other side, because I do all of this in inhabiting a Black body, right? And so I understand my political time of day, and also am well aware, also another one of John Henry Clark's words is that all history is a current event. And so we can understand and interpret and feel in this moment, but we can't separate it from history. It's not absent or isolated from history. It's in fact everything to do in this moment has everything to do with moments 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 500 years ago. It's all showing up now. And so I think in our conversation, which is just serendipitous that Dasha and I are able to engage in a conversation this way, to think about words and language as tools of the alt, right? Like if we're thinking about alternative, subversive, the spaces that represent the city that don't always get the light or the shine, to think about how words show up of the tools of engagement and interaction. So I am thrilled that it ended up being me and Dasha having this conversation. So I'm sharing, right? I show up in many spaces and I say that my title is 3 words. I'm a free Black woman. And I say that intentionally because, one, I think one of the most abstract ideas that people engage is this idea of freedom, right? And coming along with it, I am expressing a freedom that is tied to two aspects of my identity, or one, because I really think of Black womanhood as a single thing, but aspects of my identity that are the most subjugated, right? Black womanhood. And I put this word free in front of it because I understand myself outside of all of these confines, but am very connected to these root identities of Black women. And I acknowledge all of that because I think how I show up and my identity and the words that I use to craft and define my identity are really important for us to start thinking about as we understand the other side, other sides really of a situation, and what does it mean to be in this political moment. I, as you can see from the conversation, the abstract or the description of my talk, I'm leaning on the wisdom of some ancestors to like really engage this conversation about language. And I want to engage first one of my favorite writers, one of the most brilliant, debonair, and engaging authors, critics, and essayists I've ever come across, and that is James Baldwin. And in the early 70s, he wrote this article for the New York Times called "If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is." And in that article, he states, people evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. So I'm thinking about the ability for us to create words and to create language and to understand what does it mean to create a space that is self-defined by its own language tools and its own discourses. I am a Milwaukee native. I'm born and raised here. I had the privilege to attend one of the most amazing universities in the country, Howard University in Washington, D.C., and returned to Milwaukee as an adult, really craving some of the community that I had around Black folks and Blackness that I had in DC. And in doing so, I fell in step with so many awesome, beautiful people here in the city, really got a new sense of awareness and connectedness to my city. But I created and helped create an organization called All Black Everything. And I lift that up in this moment when we're talking about people evolving language, because we used to run around the city showing up in meetings, yelling, all Black, everything. And understanding that as a subversive tactic to really bring in power to understanding all Black, everything. We really were an organization that was immersing itself in Black history and culture. We had a business program, an economic program, a food program, a study group. It was an amazing time for me to really get to know myself and know others in the organizing world who were trying to organize around issues relating to being Black in the city. And I lift up that language space because all Black everything, like it still resonates, it still gives me feelings inside of my body. But to understand, like to show up in a room full of white folks and be like, all Black everything, all Black everything, from every side, from every angle. We're talking about let Blackness penetrate and reverberate throughout this space. And so I think about how powerful that chant was, right? So people evolving a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances. Let us use words to take up space that we're not allowed to take physically, economically, educationally. Let's start using our language to do that. In that same article, Baldwin continues by saying, it goes without saying then that language is also a political instrument, means, and proof of power. And if I've ever fallen in love with a sentence, that is the sentence right there. Like, language is a political instrument, means, and proof of power. Now, my research really focuses on this idea of dignity. What does it mean to understand and validate the self-worth in every single person, yourself and yourself? Like, what does it mean to put ourselves in a position to do that? And I lift that up here because dignity is one of those words that it feels good, right? People say it. If you notice, on a lot of police departments, including some in our surrounding greater Milwaukee area, use the word dignity to talk about what they're doing in communities. And I think it's important for us to understand that people utilize language to let people know how they can articulate or use their own power, wield their own power within a space, right? And so I'm thinking about just what kind of power we are able to articulate with our language. Y'all might not notice, but my earrings have a curse word on them, but it says fuck white supremacy. Just to be clear, that's what my earrings say. And I'm bringing that into the space because for a long time on my social media, which is public, I had a picture of me in a t-shirt that said fuck white supremacy across the top. And I got a job at a suburban school district in which my supervisors were trying to say that there's some sort of problem with me wearing that shirt. And that is when I wanted to engage in a very important question. What is wrong with the shirt? What is wrong with it? And that means they had to say it. They were like, well, it has a vulgar language. And I was like, vulgar, you mean white supremacy? Because that's probably the most vulgar thing that I've ever encountered. They weren't ready for that conversation. And so you think about people saying, well, it has what is known as an expletive. And I'm like, but in context, it's put against something that has probably done the most damage, the most harm to my existence and well-being. So yes, I mean that. Fuck that, right? And so I uplift that, right? Like knowing that language is also a political instrument, means, and proof of power as an opportunity for us to engage in real time to say that we can use at the very least our words to express our power. And I'm just going to go a little bit further because he goes on to say it is the most vivid and crucial key to identify. It reveals the private identity and connects one with or divorces one from the larger public or communal identity. The words that you use let people know whether you know what's up or not. When I went to college, first of all, everyone was like, wait a second, you're from where? They're Black people in Wisconsin. Those of us in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, are like, it's Black people everywhere. This is our city. But people outside, like, they see Wisconsin and they see, you know, what's on the news. And Wisconsin man does something stupid or something happens at a Wisconsin bar. They don't see Black people. We're not visible in that way. But one of the things I want to tell my friends very early on is that, you know, Black person is from Milwaukee because they say Milwaukee. That's where we from. right? And that white people from the same area say Milwaukee. It's a huge difference, right? And I say that because there is a sense of community and connection of being able to discern and understand the difference and how we're utilizing language differently to talk about where we're from and how we're operating, right? I think it's important to note that you'll understand people are from the city or doing city work when they say like, oh yeah, on King Drive. Someone who's not from here but still knows the address will say Dr. Martin Luther King Drive or Martin Luther King Street, all of these things. So I uplift the idea that you can use language to connect yourselves on an identity space, right? It happens with young people. Young people constantly are evolving language. You know, what does it mean to say no cap? You know what I mean? What is it? And if you don't know what it means, that means this language isn't for you, or you don't share that communal identity. This is about making space, right? The language markers, the discourse of the alt, the subversive, the space in where we're able to use language to create our own reality, to resist and be resilient against the reality that is given to us. That is the powerful tool that language gives us. So I go from here into thinking about the late, great Toni Morrison. And in her Nobel Prize winning speech, it's a quote that was in the description of my talk. She says, word work is sublime because it is generative. It makes meaning that secures our difference, our human difference, the way in which we are like no other life. In that spirit, we have to understand what kind of work, what kind of power we're able to engage within when we understand word work, right? Whether that is being on social media, right? Persistently reminding people about the news or the issues of the day. Whether that is those of us in the academy who are writing in the journals, right? Doing that article stuff. Whether it's those of us in the journalistic realm who are like, okay, here's the important news. Let's start this new magazine. Let's make sure the media tells this story. We are thinking about ways constantly to do our word work. It is sublime, right? It is going to this place, this depth of understanding and connection, that of resonance, right? That allows us to not just understand each other, but to grow deeper in relationship to one another. In this space, I think, as someone who does word work and is also, in the words of Amy Jack Garvey, Marcus Garvey's second wife, I'm also a race woman, right? I'm a race woman. That means I show up unapologetically, without question, talking about my Black self, right? And I am fully owning it, and I'm not doing it without reservation or without question. And because of that, my word work requires me to think differently about how my words are allowing me to enter the conversation of addressing anti-Blackness, dismantling white supremacy, calling stuff out for what it is. And so I'm thinking to myself, one, like, what am I able to do in this space that allows me to name things and describe experiences that are not typically a part of our shared narratives because they've been boxed out because they come from Black folks, right? How do we get into spaces where Black folks, particularly Black folks from this city, Black folks from urban areas, Black folks that have been displaced, that have been marginalized, how do we become a part of this major narrative? How do we become a part of the defining space to call things for what they are? So I'm going to wrap it up before I toss it over to Dasha, that I share all of this in the idea of Sebayit, right? And Sebayit is a Kemetic word, ancient Egyptian word that means wisdom, instructions from the ancestors. And I'm utilizing Baldwin and Morrison here to talk about, they have given us, not just by their example, right? Because we have all of their writings as pure example of like, just as what it means to use our words, but they say very pointedly how important language is, how important it is to be a part of discourses, how important it is to do our word work, how important it is to be in conversation about our experience, to name things, describe things, give people the opportunity to utilize their words and know how much power their words have. So I am so excited and so thrilled that I'm able to end my space and hand it over to Dasha, who is masterful with understanding words and engagement and what this means in this overall conversation about the power of words.
Thank you so much. And I am excited that, I mean, how else can we go wrong if you have invoked the Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Clark and Sister Morrison? Looked like we were all homies, right? So that is definitely going to set the tone. And I appreciate that start, because it does start with the language. And I'm going to go a little bit about what comes behind that language, my experience so far. So I'm going to have you have a seat on this fancy couch over here. And so I am Dasha Kelly Hamilton. I am the Milwaukee Poet Laureate. I am a writer, a performer, an educator, a facilitator, a curator, and a change agent. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my story, and that will lead me to, because I think the context is going to be important. So I am a Milwaukee native, born at St. Joseph's, to a Custer High School alum and a graduate from Milwaukee Lutheran. And they met at UW Whitewater. I was the official mascot baby of the fraternity house. Hey, Fi. My father joined ROTC in his final years of college to be prepared for the draft papers that he and so many of his peers were expecting after graduation. And he tells this story of a recruiter on campus who was dead set, pun intended, on getting him, was her language to him, was getting him recruited, drafted, and with his afro, with his activism, with all of his red, black, and green, with his loud voice on campus, and his unapologetic brilliance. And he did, in fact, end up going into the military, but he went in on his own terms. He was commissioned as an officer when I was 4 years old, and retired nearly 3 decades later as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So I grew up traveling around the world with my family, from Wisconsin to Georgia to Korea, back to Wisconsin, then Indiana, Germany. I'm off to college, and my family continues to Virginia, Hawaii, Illinois, and back to Wisconsin again. So for most of my life, Milwaukee, that's for you, Mo, Milwaukee has been little more than a permanent address on our family records. My interactions with this city growing up were entirely defined by the straight shot drive into town to visit my grandparents and cousins and family. So I was also one of those neo-grown folks who swore that I would never live here. I mean, why, right? That's what the young folks will say. And I used to be a younger folk. And until I lived here. So I finished grad school in Chicago, and I landed a PR job at a firm here in a city that was technically my hometown, but I had to learn it like a transplant. So I share all of this origin story to allow a framework for my outlook on what ails Milwaukee and what I think will strive us all forward. And it's important for me to make clear that I am fully aware that the impact of my experiences and my privileges have afforded me. So not only did my immediate family interact with a wild range of other families and languages and foods and perspectives, but my extended family were entrepreneurs and healers and artists. I come from folks who made their own way in making their own way. So as a young professional, a new leader of tomorrow, I was wildly out of sorts here. I attended all of the after work things and all the young professional things and all the let's get together and trade business card things. And I found myself disappointed a lot, but I didn't exactly know why. So 6 months into being in the city, I was already scouting for a new city, a real city that wasn't a big, small town with a big city size. And that really wasn't it either. I had just moved up here from Chicago. So Chicago was a huge city, and the bustle isn't what made it great. The people that I lived with and that I loved and made art with and figured out how to be grown with, that's what made it great. Milwaukee, the love was hard to muster, and I think in both directions. So I want to share 3 things that happened as guideposts in my early professional young whippersnapper days in this city that have stayed with me and really been guideposts to not just the work that I've come to do, but how and why I do that work. 1, I was out and about one of the after work things and having little fancy agency business cards. And I was taken aback because often someone would say, the question would be, hey, where'd you go to school? And the answer would be whatever high school. Now, in all of my networking experience at that time, the answer to that question had usually been you went to Howard or you went to Roosevelt, you went to whatever university. So in a professional setting that we're talking about where we did or didn't go to high school, I didn't know why it felt odd. I just knew that it was. 2, I did the subcommittees and the volunteer committees and the networking groups and the leadership clubs and the women's alliances and the sorority work and the civic groups. I did all the things that a young professional with time and experience and energy is going to do. I did the whole thing. And on more than one occasion, all of the work of us volunteers would get squashed by a decision to, let's just do what we did last year. 3, a few friends and I, we tried to start a First Fridays series here. Now, First Fridays was a phenomenon in the 90s. It was a super jam of a happy hour of Black professionals, and they were happening in cities all across the country. So you'd have a happy hour and you would go to different venues around the city, and it was amazing, amazing, amazing movement. And so here, though, it was, what is this? And who gets to come? And why does it move every month? And why does it have to be downtown? Which we received. And so we made sure that we moved it all to different parts of the city because the feedback was correct. Everyone doesn't work downtown. And then once month, we hosted it at a venue on 6th and National. And I was told that we don't go past the bridge. So again, learning the city and what has kept our mindset in a grip, what has kept our communities of color in the boxes that were defined for us by redlining, because in some cases it's not legally that we don't move and don't navigate and that we're not safe. But we're conditioned for a lot of power structure reasons not to. So fast forward, and I've gone from public relations to directing a citywide youth program to consulting as a marketing strategist and event planner to opening a bar and hosting a little tiny open mic, which celebrates 20 years next week. So this first open mic was literally just 4 people standing around a cocktail table, and we were initially blackballed by other established poets because territory is what Milwaukee does really, really well. So that's neighborhoods, that's municipal departments, that's nonprofits and community groups, it's business, even poets. And so from the stories I've shared thus far, it shouldn't be surprising that I was not going to be fazed or deterred by other people's decisions about what I should or shouldn't do. Those poets and others started to come around, and then more folks started to come around. And then we grew to national prominence, in fact. And our love fest of poets was nurtured, and it was impossible to deny. And so along the way, we all were invited to start coming up with after-school programs to go into classrooms. And I knew initially that my presence in the classroom had little to do with poems or writing, or really to that point, most about words. When I was going to a classroom and asked these students, how many of you know that you have good ideas? And fewer than 1/3 of the class would raise their hand. And this is high school, middle school, elementary school, even the kindergarten classes. Yes, I've done this work from kindergarten to college, y'all. It was really clear that it was less about how to shape poets and writers, but how to make this experience about their ideas. So I started creating sessions that opened up their imagination, that gave them permission to put words together and stories together without the fear of being wrong. Now, on one hand, that's just the nature of school. So I thought that I was just injecting a little fun to their learning, but with every set of eyes that would light up, and that's from children and grownups, I realized this work is about permission and not about poems. So fast forward some more, and our program, Stillwater's Collective, has its own fellowships, an immersive experience that was navigating the conversations and leadership communities in our city. With one of my fellowship cohorts, in the middle of their term, they pulled me aside and like, we was mad at you. I said, I know. Let's talk about that. And their feedback was, what we realized is that first we were mad because you were asking us to do things, but not telling us how to do it. And then we realized that what we were really mad about is how deeply ingrained it's been in us what we cannot do. So I keep these kind of accountings in my work. So earlier I introduced myself as a change agent, but I am a creative change agent. My research on how and why I've built this work and how to design these structures, it took me to researching the impact of play, the impact of imagination and creating. I learned earlier that the actual poem read at the end of an open mic or shared in the classroom is far less consequential than that person's realization that they can do a thing, that they can imagine a whole world out of thin air. And what's more, the creative process is an intentional process of discovery and problem solving. And at some point, maybe 5 years ago, businesses were starting to scout candidates with MFAs over MBAs because anybody can read a spreadsheet. Okay, that's not true. I can't read a spreadsheet. But it is a creative mind that will source a new path. And Milwaukee does not have a history of new paths. That mindset of do the same thing as last year shows up everywhere, from the political landscape that is more concerned about holding on to power positions than leveraging powers for the good of its residents, to community groups and nonprofits that are governed by appearances instead of action, to business community content with narrow margins and opportunities and ideas. It's just the way things are, we like to say. So part of this is how we think about progress. Who gets to design it? Who gets to speak on it? Who gets to expect it? The same thing last year also includes the gross inequities in education, in healthcare, in home ownership, in police violence, in class disparity, racial tensions. And we are all steeping in an old mindset of fear and contentment, of every fundraiser and restaurant and elected official and summer festival being exactly the same, of discouraging ideas and individuals that are cut from unique cloths. So another quick story, I used to do speaking for monster.com. They had an amazing program called Making It Count and Diversity Leadership Program. So one of these weekends we were working with these college students, and these are the best and brightest from all over there. The president of the Black Student Unions, the leader of the Native American Council, the president of La Raza, all of these students coming together. So diversity in terms of race was handled. So we had a session about diversity of thinking. And so we got trained, of course, to lead this training. I have a nugget that it still sits with me. As a creative thinker, right, I used to think that the logistics person, if I'm imagining a circle here, that this logistics person was put in place just to annoy me, right? So I call them the Sharpie marker people. So this training helped me appreciate that this diversity of thought is also necessary in any successful team for any endeavor of importance. So the same way you need someone like me imagining all the things that are possible, we need the Sharpie marker person making sure that someone is making sure the Sharpie markers are going to happen. And often we didn't have that patience for one another. And that's regardless of what skin they were wrapped in. I'm the creative person, you're the logistics person, and we had to find a way and recognize that everybody brings a superpower to a super team. So creativity is a resource. And yes, the arts are an obvious outlet for that. And you'll notice I've not said much about creating art because often it gets, one discussion gets co-opted by the other. We're going to set the art discussion over here for a moment. But I'm talking about the willingness to make something that wasn't there before. Make a shortcut, make an alliance, make access, make partnerships, make honest and informed conversations, solutions that benefit everyone, and they also make joy. So creativity is hard strategy work. It is the opposite of let's do the same thing last year, kind of a mindset. Of another resident here who's gone on to live some other places in the state, had a title in a quote in one of her pieces from George Wallace. And George Wallace in 1954 said, "If I didn't live in the great state of Alabama, I would move to the south side of Milwaukee." I'm gonna let that sink in. George Wallace. And that speaks to the same mindset we had last year. So since 1954, that mindset, as we know, is embedded in everything built in this city. It is embedded in how leadership functions. It is embedded in how we are conditioned as a residency, as people, to operate out of fear and want, and the assumption that we don't have the words, that we don't have the voice or the right even to imagine outside of what we already see. So even though it's been working in poems, working in performances, working in a creative space, what I propose that was really the bomb for this city is an embrace of creativity. Again, art is a discussion way over there. We'll have it one day. Can we talk about the art high school that lost funding for art? We'll get back to that. But just an invitation to imagine something different and to encourage folks to bring their imagination into these conversations, because that is how we're going to move past into another alt Milwaukee.
Wow. Wow.
Right?
Wow. Wow.
So I was excited to get to that. I know in sharing my story and just what I've observed, also perfectly behind what you shared, Mo, about the study of words. Because yes, that we could have gone there, and I'm glad it worked out this way, because oftentimes that discussion of just the words, if you don't have the wherewithal to breathe into those words, so the exposure that you had personally, the experience that you have, and whoever raised you, I've heard you give the presentation of you the daughter of. So you also come from a long line of humans who ain't about no shit. Mm-hmm. So, and everyone doesn't have that perspective. So I've met some amazing folks and worked with some great folks who really had to be invited to imagine. So a lot of it, so I wanted to share all of my initial story to pray. I get it. I know I come from some special people, had a special circumstance, but still at the core, it's believing that and knowing and have been able to witness that we can imagine a whole new everything.
Yes. And I think, so one, I didn't realize how deeply our personal histories around Milwaukee are so similar, of having, like, I was the person who left at 17 and was like, I'm not ever coming back here. Like, never, ever, ever, ever. And then thanks to serendipitous ancestral lining, it was like, oh, no, you're going back to Milwaukee. You don't know why. You don't know what you're about to do there, but go. And be. And so I think about that adding to a part of how we show up, because we did leave and then come back, and then we're able to add to it. And I think to your point about the creative spirit that's behind the language part, like what does it mean to resonate in that space, to build within that space, to think about like, I have an imagination and it has the nerve or the audacity to be radical, right? Mm-hmm. to think outside of this space, and like, I could imagine something that you ain't never heard of before, that you ain't never thought about, never considered, and have the audacity to position myself, my Black womanhood, myself, my Black family, my Black neighborhood into a new authority that allows me to operate in a way that you've never imagined before. I was listening, and earlier they had the concert for Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. I don't know if you saw that. And it was just phenomenal. And thinking about, one, uplifting this idea that all of our work to imagine something new is got to be sci-fi. Like, it has to be.
I have a friend of mine who's like, you understand all the solutions are specifically in Octavia Butler's work too. And I was like, I know, I'll read it. I'm not it's sci-fi. I'm learning to appreciate in a different way. So, but this feels like a sci-fi space too. I mean, how have you managed and not just you alone, because we also have been able to surround ourselves. I know that I've stayed sane because I've insulated with myself with people who also churn like this. Mm-hmm. But how have you handled with the difference of thought? Do you feel like an alien? Do you feel like the person that's sci-fi? Are you? How have you managed that?
That's a real good question. I definitely feel alien and external often. One of the questions I get asked the most is, where are you from? Here. And I'm like, I am from Milwaukee. I was born and raised here. And I often feel external in terms of all of the circles that you should be a part of, right? And I really appreciate you bringing up like what Stillwaters was birthed from, and to not forget what Milwaukee does well is not just territory, but isolation, right? Like, to make sure that this never touches that, and there's no room for us to ever coexist or co-create, and that how detrimental that is. So I think in the way that I've witnessed you spread across the city, and the way I felt natural to spread across the city has often felt like alien, and I'm going to say extraterrestrial, and just like beyond what was happening. So I definitely, that resonates for me. And I'm thinking about, from what you were saying, from your stories and creative change agent. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
The process.
One of the most powerful titles someone could have. I wonder, from your perspective, what does it mean to start creating in a way that allows power to be a part of the creative process? Like, what are your thoughts around like power and creativity sort of moving us into a new direction?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. I had someone ask me, and I don't know, anyway, I had someone ask me just recently, my opinion about art being created out of ego, and what my thoughts were about it. I says, well, you know, I think that it depends on why somebody goes into that art. So I was telling them my experience is people that do art for the culture, for their healing, for a particular cause. It's really connected to their identity. So, and I know that's a shade. I was telling him it's a shade different from the ego of look at what I've done, but still to honor the fact that, you know, people enter that work for different personal reasons. So with that being said, it's the idea of how do you honor how and why people do how and what they do. It's not going to be for the same reasons that you or I would. And instead having a common agreement of why we're here, whatever this here is. In my days as the director of the Black Achievers Program, you know, you're dealing with young people and volunteers and corporate sponsors, and everyone has a WIFM, which I value. I want to know what's in it for you so we can make that happen or not. But at the end of the day, okay, we're here about getting these young people ready for their life, right? Okay, so what you're talking about, we can agree that this is why we're here, this right here. So the power is finding a common thread and finding a way to honor that, and then making space for people to do and be what they need to be on that common thread. So to your point of this is the only way that I can be a poet, or this is the only way that I can show up and be a free Black woman in this city. Do I have to have the St. John suit? Do I have to sit at so-and-so's feet and let her choose me to be on her committee? Do I have to go to the event and wear all the same color? Do I have to do these things, or can I be a free Black woman on my own accord? And we don't, so much of us not being encouraged, free Black woman, free Latin man, non-binary, we're not encouraged to own and show up and be that. So across this timeline, it's really been finding a common space. This is the open mic, or this is the anthology, or this is how we're bringing young people together, and give them the space to be who they are until they get in the way of someone else being who they are. So it's a release of control that actually gives you a lot more power, because then you're focused on this thing. But I can also appreciate the folks, for example, I mean, poetry beef is crazy. You know, like, well, we're going to stop coming to your space because everyone at your space is treated like a rock star. But over there, only 10 of us are treated like a rock star, and that feels more natural.
That's it right there. Like, that is, ooh, yes, tingles, all of that resonance, because I am unapologetic about how I show up in the race work. But when we start talking about like Blackness, right, and you start acting within the audacity to be whatever you want, punk rock Black,
you better not.
And you do it whatever and however and still proclaim Blackness. It's like, no, Black is supposed to look and be and act like this, right? You're supposed to be 10 times better. You're supposed to watch what you say. You should. You should. It's so tightly constructed around that. And I think in the most segregated city, because I think, you know, we bump up and down other cities all the time against the Midwest, but I think culturally, Milwaukee takes the cake. Like, people do not know the other side of the city. Like, that's some north side stuff. I don't know nothing about it. That's south side. I don't know nothing about it. I don't know. If it's not a taco, I don't know anything about the south side. If it's not the mall, I don't know nothing about the north side. Like, it's very, very, it's felt and resonant, and it's in the air. It's palpable, to that it's supposed to be a certain way. I feel more comfortable in my own oppression, that I'd rather operate in the oppressed state and convince you to operate in the oppressed state than to ever consider that we could be free from all of this.
Because for you to think that, there's something wrong with you.
Obviously.
Or you think that you're trying to, and how's it going to be? And don't be wrong, with the example sharing the story about the DPL, about the diversity leadership program, I get it as a creative person who shows up in the room talking about, you know what we can do, and then I know I make people crazy. I get that. But I still have something to offer to the conversation. I still have some gems that I can drop if we can figure out how to make that work together. But the idea of letting you have that moment is going to take away from me possibly having a moment, or me being recognized what I have to think. And again, that's in committees, that's organizationally. It's how our institutions are structured. So I'm curious to know, with that, how do you imagine forward, right? So, and I try to stay in that space too, so I can wax on, as you can probably hear my passion on and on and on and on about where we've been. But I really try to be mindful about being a part of where we're going. So for me, it has been, how do we make space? So I could have done all the schools. I could have done all of that. And I did as many as I could. And then I was like, well, how about you come on, other poet, 17-year-old who's trying to figure out their life. And then we grew this thing together. So how do we move forward? How do we move this thing that we know, that we feel, that we move it forward? What would that look like for the city?
I think living into the possibility of creating new spaces feels so good. And to know that you don't have to isolate in any space, that I can be in this space and that space. I know I'm somebody who has created 2 completely separate organizations at the same time and have been cool with it, which is like a no-no, right? You're supposed to be that all day over there. And it's like, no, I'm going to show up as an artist and creative in this space. And over here, I'm going to show up as an academic. They're both important to me. I'll cuss you out in both spaces.
And the earrings go in both places, right?
They go in both places, but they're distinct. And there's power in both. So I think in the imagining forward, it's like, hearing you talk about, or resonating, or remembering, recalling, or what it means to be 20 years in the still waters, and thinking about me, who gets to walk not in your footsteps, but in knowledge of your footsteps being there, and creating similar spaces in the evaluation world, a separate world, right? But doing a lot of the same things of like, you wouldn't normally hire this person, but we gonna come over here, we gonna do some dope that you ain't never imagined. You wouldn't have given them a chance to even do it because you never constructed a world for them this way. And so I just think about, creating a space and the number of spaces that exist, and the imagining forward piece is, and we can keep doing it. Like there's nothing stopping us from just like, let's do another one and another one
and another one and another one. Because it really is, there is enough for everyone. So for a lot of historical and factual and for real disparity reasons, the idea of lack and crumbs, we do have a lot of structural things we have to work through. And even saying that there's enough for everyone, right? So, and leading that way, and even following, if we have some more folks who can do both, lead and follow at the same time, then it really is a community. I have a question that came through, want to share with us. They want to know, what do we do to remain whole in an environment like Milwaukee that nurtures so much division? So I'll say, not rethinking it, that I want it to be different, but I have just been mindful about who I surround myself with, what events I support, and not feeling the need to show up to stuff, to talk about things, to watch the shows, to entertain power plays that don't serve me. And when I say don't serve me, not just about, is this going to get me somewhere? Or is this going to gain me something? And I'm not wrong. As much as, I'm a poet and an artist and critic, I'm a strategist too. So I'm a businesswoman too. I'm not a fool. But at my core, I also need to keep my sanity together. So if I was telling somebody recently, if I were still waiting on XYZ to support, to believe, to get it, I'd still be waiting. So, And that's come from, my professional work to my art to also the humans that I vibrate with. And I lean into that, and we vibe together. It's not about creative or artists and people that are so opposite of me, and we vibe because we're able to be real with each other. So that's how I personally keep myself whole and safe, is that I, even if it's a popular thing, the important place, or the businesswoman smart event to be, I just don't go. If I know I just don't go. So I've insulated myself with a community that I value and values me back. What about you?
Yeah, that carries a lot of weight. I think for me, it's definitely been a retraining or a relearning of what is putting myself first look like and mean. And honoring that, and to the same extent, right? I don't have to be everywhere, because I think we have gotten into the bad habit of the false sense of being seen, right? Like being seen is showing up with this, and this at the event. And I think we've learned, and I feel like this is true about how we relate. Like, no, I see you. I see you. And I'm going to let you know that I see you when I see you. Right. I don't need to do anything extra or go beyond, or like exhaust myself, or, perpetrate, put on airs, do all the language things that we know is true to living on the North Side, being a part of the Black community. But like, I can see you and I can recognize you, and I can let you know that by telling you, I see.
What?
I see you.
So you're saying that you're able to tell someone that you see them and you acknowledge them, and you didn't feel that detracted from your power?
Not at all. Not even a little bit. It added to it. And it meant like I don't have to go to your event because I see you doing big things, and I'm back here lighting an incense, a candle, saying a prayer, and drinking water on your behalf, because I'm going to take a nap because I am tired from doing my work.
For your own big things.
And I think that's that recognition. And I'll be honest, one of the relearning spaces that I really had to work on was learning how to build community with Black women that weren't family. Like that was a thing I had to learn in adulthood that wasn't natural. I started it in college, at the HBCU, you're definitely forced to engage that conversation. But like really understanding that so much of the world and the words that I've used and the way I was moving was because I was taught to hate Black womanhood. Like I was taught to hate that. And so it was like, we use that language of pick me, like you're supposed to do this way and talk this way and get all the degrees and and get up because it was a very, very narrow thing. It didn't allow the freedom of expression that like we've shared is really important for us to acknowledge. And then once I do it, I can see it in others and then gain more power from just seeing other people do their thing. So that's kept me whole, right? Seeing and being seen, but not in the, out at the club kind of way.
One of the things you said in your comments, Mo, is that you understand yourself outside of the identities that have been given to you. So that would be from the researcher. How are you going to be a researcher and still be so cool? How are you going to be a free Black woman and have these conversations about Black womanhood? So even though it feels that it is fluid for you, this is not anything new that you're figuring out, it's still a negotiation though. Right. So what does that look like for you now in this idea of freeing yourself from expectations of identity that'll help you lean into your community power? Yeah,
I think it's really owning in the thought process, right? How much of the things that we think are rooted in the shoulds, right? That somebody else has given us or that we have owned because no one said it. And like, what does it mean for us to be in a space of like, just because I got these letters in front of my name or behind my name, whatever matters, doesn't mean I got to do anything. I don't have to do anything but stay Black and die, right?
That's what my daddy
said. I don't have to do anything. So everything that I do is a choice beyond that, and make sure that I contextualize everything from that point on. And so I think that's really important, because even you yourself said, like, I don't know how many people would say, I know Dasha Kelly Hamilton, businesswoman. They would say that. They might know that or experience that, but not say that because they're like, I know Dasha Kelly Hamilton, poet.
Poet.
Like, end it there.
And done. So I'm looking at the time too, and I want to ask you one last question, and it definitely brings us back to where we all are together in this space. As you share with Dr. Clark's words, that we have to understand that a political time and place in all history is a current event. So in this current event that we're living right now, and encouraging a city to recognize that you wield and you manifest with your words, and that's not just a poet and some incense and a fun thing to say. You manifest with your words, but you've got to believe or think or imagine outside of that. So that's what we're putting forth. So what is this time we're in?
Yeah, that's so important. I think understanding this political time of day reminds us to look back at history. There's some things that we are experiencing that it's not like, oh no, what is this? No, this is actually here. This is the routine. This is the routine. And so, like, have we made ourselves aware of what the routine is? Because it's like 2 steps left, 2 steps right, check, shoot, dip. And like that's what happens, except you just always entered when the song is over. And so you just heard the dum. That's all you ever heard. So like, what do we do ourselves in a space where like, no, it's actually this, and like being well versed in the whole routine so that you can understand this cycle. So understanding this moment as we're facing global pandemic, we know it from history that it's a 100-year cycle, and this happened 100 years ago in the exact same way, right? And that even when it happened 100 years ago, there was the same people who were saying, no, I don't believe in this. And a whole bunch of other people saying, chill, fam, we trying to be okay.
It's possible.
And it's like this whole story is reliving itself over again. And then what's underlying it is some of the age-old routines that are going out over and over again of like, even in this, some recent articles, I think it was in the Atlantic, of talking about when we're moved into this virtual space, about the unseen burden of labor being heavily on women and not on men, and how we're showing up in this virtual space, right? The ways I'm thinking about things or processing things, or like, I got to make sure that the cat, litter is out and that no one hears this, in ways that other people, mostly men, are not putting themselves in. So like, when we're understanding our political time of day, is position ourselves in a moment that says, this is where we are right now. What are we experiencing in the cycle of human life at this moment that has occurred before? And so just being conscious of that, putting ourselves here and saying, yep, and here's where we are on this point.
That's really helpful because it gives you power, but it also invites you to lean into a little bit of humility, right? So knowing that it's a cycle, and not so much where it's going to repeat and you're trapped in it. But to your point, you understand how the cycle works. Like you can't be a great jazz musician unless you know what music rules you're breaking. And so then if you just scatting willy-nilly, you're just making noise.
Yes, you have to bring in the Coltrane experience, right? Like all the things Coltrane did that defy every law was because he knew it so well that he could riff off of it in ways you didn't imagine. Wow. And now he's created his own genre of music that it's like it stands alone. And I think that's what this political moment allows us. This is where, like you said, creativity and innovation can thrive. Now we're creating the riffs. We're creating the riffs here.
We're going to get this. I'm going to invite Mo and Richard, to the other Mo, to make their way on screen as well. So we're at the last few minutes before we wave to everyone. So we had an incredible audience of folks that have been participating, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know I was about to hit another story that's going to take us another 4 hours. Yeah. So I'm stopping myself and handing it over to the two of you.
I just wanted to follow up on the last thing. Well, first I wanted to say how goddamn amazing you two Black women were. Exactly.
Thank you.
3 Black women. And that was just fantastic. But Mo, you were talking about this moment in a kind of poetic sense. And I wanted to just bring it down a little bit, because we are at a moment, as you say, where the same stories, same cycles of oppression are happening, and the same groups of people are the ones who are suffering most from this current epidemic. And the concern of the people in power, mostly the white men in power, is, okay, when can we get back to, let's exploit these people to get us back to where we were and where we want to be and where we're comfortable. But as Lane Hall was saying about speculative fiction, and the two of you were saying about science fiction, we are at a moment where we can begin to imagine that we don't have to go back to all the same things we were doing before, that we can restructure the world. But at the same time that we can imagine that restructuring is still being done on the backs of the same people that the first structure was built up. So that's
same thing last year.
Yeah, exactly. That's the real conundrum here and what we wanted to deal with. So I don't know. We all want answers, I guess, but breaking these bridges and crossing the bridge and, seeing each other and hanging out with each other. I mean, those are the steps. And it might be, maybe this weird technologies we're working with can enable more of that for people to become comfortable to connect from different places. I don't know. That might then lead to actually coming in the same space and, sharing a drink or a meal.
And one thing you said, Mo, was being able to call a thing a thing. So we talk around the thing for the appearances of, for fear of. So I don't want to say the thing so I don't lose my cushy job. I don't want to say the thing so I don't get uninvited to Thanksgiving. I don't want to say the thing that we all see, that we all are affected by. I mean, to different degrees. So this is the time of being able to say things out loud, and that's going to help us imagine forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I am in a process of searching for wow, right? Like in this moment, like I really want to be impressed just of like the new ways of being, right? So like I never knew how powerful a stick was to me. Like seeing a stick outside, like I took a walk, I saw a stick and I was like, wow. No, I was not under any herbal influence. It was just me in my own brain. But like really just like, wow, this stick. And then I started thinking about what I could do with it. And but this is all because like I'm isolated in a lot of ways and I'm not doing what I normally do. So now I'm having new moments of wow. And I think to your point, Richard, like the more wow that we have that begins to connect on a collective sense, right? To just be like, hey, I normally wouldn't have a conversation with you, but since I did, let me tell you about this wow I had. And then this wow leads to a shared wow of like, we never thought about this because we've never been allowed to operate in this space. So I think just opening up and stretching into like, let's see those moments of wow that we get to in the middle of all of this, right? And not, like you said, ignoring the fact that in the process of undoing a thing, we're also recreating the same thing, and we have to wow and disrupt that, right? So like we cannot recreate a thing where Black women's labor is like powering the whole country. And then, but if you do that, you'll kill us off. And then we're in a different sci-fi book, right? So like, let's
we don't want to read that one. We do not want to read that one.
Don't want to read that one. So like, let's acknowledge and disrupt it so we get to those moments of wow.
Mo, every time I see you, it's wow. So,
Agreed.
That's my silent wow. I've been using it since high school.
So, yeah, this is great. I mean, you're getting outside is really nice too. I'm living in Chicago now, and it's so amazing. I'm, on the near sort of northwest side, and but I can just walk into downtown because there's so little traffic. I would never walk into downtown. There's so many cars, and it was just, the exhaust. But now I just walk in and I'm walking along the river and I'm seeing all these things that I would have just gone right by on a bus, something like that, right by in my car. And so there are these possibilities of being out there, as you say, noticing the sticks, that are there. And we need to continue those. And we just, there's no answers immediately, but we've got somebody who has a comment.
Shouting out Zora. We're getting all of the ancestors on here.
Bring them in.
Great.
This was so great. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad we could make this happen. And speaking of moments of wow, we would have not had this conversation, Dasha, in the way it was originally conceptualized, right? Like, so to think that the moment of wow was to be like, okay, let's riff this way, is beautiful. So I'm just really thankful for being a part of this conversation and having the opportunity to share with folks. This has been great.
I am too. This is wonderful to be able to, again, just kind of share, you know, your personal thoughts, and to be able to fall in conversation about something that we both are walking and figuring out. And a lot of it, when we were riffing, I was like, oh, that's right. So we're not trying to save the city. We're just giving our perspective. That's right. We can do that too. So this definitely filled me in my heart and my mind, and I needed all of that today.
Well, on behalf of C21, yeah, we really thank you guys. And this should not be an ending. I mean, this is an opening for us to continue to work together once we can actually sit in the same room and share a drink and share a meal. And God, the Wild West of Wisconsin, I don't know.
We're going to get that together.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. Thanks, all. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.